You told my wife to leave. Marcus Washington's voice carried the kind of quiet authority that had built empires and toppled competitors, but tonight, in the marble-columned entrance of the Fairmont Grand Ballroom, it trembled with something far more dangerous than anger. The event coordinator, a skeletal woman whose smile had frozen the moment she'd spotted Amara's dark skin against the sea of pale faces, clutched her clipboard like a shield. Mr. Washington, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Perhaps Mrs. Washington would be more comfortable if you're enjoying this story, tell us in the comments section, where you're watching us from, and kindly hit the like button and subscribe to our channel, What? Marcus stepped closer, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow over the woman who'd just made the biggest mistake of her career. Around them, Silicon Valley's elite continued their champagne-fueled networking, oblivious to the earthquake about to shatter their gilded world. More comfortable where, exactly? But Marcus already knew. He'd known the moment they'd walked through those doors and every conversation had died, every smile had shifted, every welcome had withered. He'd known when the photographer had somehow missed Amara in every group shot, when the auction paddle had never made it to their table, when the bathroom attendant had asked his wife, if she was, with the catering staff. What he hadn't known was that this wasn't an accident. What he hadn't known was that 3 blocks away, in a private dining room at the Century Club, the real guest list. The one with the handwritten notes beside certain names, the one with the red marks and the crossed-out invitations, sat in a manila folder marked Annual Cleanup Protocol. What he hadn't known was that in exactly 17 minutes, someone would take a photo of him and Amara leaving the gala, and that photo would land in an encrypted group chat titled, The Adjustment Committee, with a message that would change everything: the Washington problem is escalating. Time to implement Protocol 7. But Marcus Washington hadn't built a tech empire by backing down from problems. He'd built it by solving them. And as he watched his wife's shoulders straighten, as he saw her chin lift with that fierce pride that had made him fall in love with her 15 years ago, Marcus made a decision that would either destroy them both or burn Silicon Valley's old guard to the ground. No, he said, his voice cutting through the ballroom's crystal chandelier ambience like a blade. She's not going anywhere. But I think it's time San Francisco learned exactly who runs this town. The coordinator's smile finally cracked. Mr. Washington, I don't think you understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers already moving across the screen. I'm about to show you just how much I understand. He hit send on a message that would reach 43 journalists, 16 city council members, and every major tech CEO in the Bay Area. But more importantly, it would reach the one person who'd been waiting 20 years for this moment, someone who knew exactly what Protocol 7 meant, and who had the documents to prove it. The game was about to begin. And Marcus Washington had just declared war on the most powerful secret society in Silicon Valley. The morning fog had lifted from the Santa Clara Valley by the time Marcus Washington's personal assistant, Elena, placed the stack of correspondence on his mahogany desk. The corner office of Washington Dynamics occupied the entire 42nd floor of the gleaming tower that bore his name, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering an unobstructed view of the tech empire he'd built from nothing. Marcus barely glanced up from his triple-monitor setup where lines of code scrolled past like digital waterfalls. At 52, he possessed the kind of focused intensity that had transformed a community college dropout into one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, each keystroke worth potentially millions in market value. The usual suspects, Elena said, her voice carrying the efficient warmth of someone who'd managed his affairs for the better part of a decade. 2 acquisition offers, 3 board meeting requests, and something from the Prometheus Foundation. The Prometheus Foundation. Marcus paused, his fingers hovering over the keys. In the rarefied air of Silicon Valley's elite, few events commanded the respect and fear that the Foundation's annual gala inspired. It wasn't just a charity event, it was a coronation ceremony for the tech industry's true royalty. Invitations were extended to perhaps 50 individuals worldwide, each one representing a net worth that could fund small nations. He'd been invited 3 times before. Each time, he and Sophia had walked the red carpet together, her hand resting lightly on his arm as photographers captured what the press called tech's power couple. Each time, he'd written a check with enough zeros to make headlines, solidifying his position in the pantheon of Silicon Valley legends. The golden envelope felt heavier than it should have. Marcus turned it over in his hands, noting the familiar weight of the premium cardstock, the subtle texture that spoke of old money and older power. The Prometheus Foundation seal, a flame clutched in a digital hand, was embossed in actual gold foil. Inside, the invitation was everything he expected and nothing he prepared for. Mr. Marcus Washington, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Washington Dynamics, you are cordially invited to attend the Prometheus Foundation's annual gala for digital innovation and humanitarian progress. This year's theme, Architects of Tomorrow. October 28, 2023, 7 p.m. The Fairmont San Francisco Penthouse Ballroom. Black tie. Individual invitation. Non-transferable. Marcus read the invitation twice, then a third time, his eyes scanning for something that had always been there before. The elegant script that typically read, Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Washington, now bore only his name. The phrase, individual invitation, seemed to pulse on the page like a neon sign. His throat tightened. In the 12 years since he'd married Sophia Chen Washington, she'd never been excluded from anything. The former Stanford computer science professor turned successful author had her own considerable reputation in tech circles. Her book, Code and Conscience. Ethics in the Age of AI, had become required reading at every major university. She'd given TED Talks that garnered millions of views. She'd been profiled in Wired, Forbes, and Time. And she'd been his partner in everything. Marcus reached for his phone, then stopped. Sophia was in New York, meeting with publishers about her second book. The 3-hour time difference meant she'd be deep in negotiations right now. But more than that, he couldn't shake the feeling that calling her about this would be admitting something he wasn't ready to face. He studied the invitation again, looking for any explanation, any footnote or attachment that might clarify the oversight. But the golden paper remained stubbornly silent on the matter. Elena knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through years of managing his impossible schedule. The Goldman Sachs conference call is in 10 minutes, she said, then paused, noting his expression. Everything all right? Elena, Marcus said slowly, when the Prometheus Foundation sent invitations in previous years, did they ever, always addressed to both you and Mrs. Washington, she finished. I remember because I had to coordinate with her publisher to ensure she'd be back from her European book tour in time for the 2021 gala. The weight in Marcus's chest grew heavier. And this year? Elena's eyes moved to the invitation in his hands, her expression shifting from professional efficiency to something closer to concern. Just your name, Mr. Washington. I assumed. I thought perhaps it was a mistake. A mistake. Marcus almost laughed at the impossibility of it. The Prometheus Foundation didn't make mistakes. Every detail of their annual gala was planned with the precision of a military operation. The guest list was curated by a committee that included former presidents, Nobel laureates, and the kind of old-money philanthropists who'd shaped American industry for generations. If Sophia's name wasn't on the invitation, it was because someone had made a very deliberate decision to exclude her. Sir. Elena's voice seemed to come from far away. The Goldman Sachs call. Marcus looked up, momentarily disoriented. The familiar weight of decision-making, of running a company that employed 30,000 people across 6 continents, suddenly felt insignificant compared to the 4-by-6-inch piece of paper in his hands. Cancel it, he said. Sir. Cancel the call. Cancel everything until noon. He stood, the invitation still clutched in his right hand. I need to think. After Elena left, Marcus moved to the window. Below, the sprawling campus of Washington Dynamics hummed with activity. Employees moved between buildings like blood cells through arteries, carrying the innovations that had made him rich beyond measure. His company's software powered everything from autonomous vehicles to medical devices to the algorithms that determined who got loans and who didn't. Power. He'd always understood its weight, its responsibility. But standing there, looking out at the empire he'd built, Marcus began to understand something else about power. How easily it could be weaponized, how quickly it could turn from shield to sword. The invitation in his hand wasn't just an oversight or a snub. It was a message. And in Silicon Valley, messages like this one had a way of becoming reality with terrifying speed. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophia, meeting's going well. Publisher loves the new chapters. Miss you. See you Friday. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone down without responding. How could he explain that while she'd been fighting for her book, building her career, establishing herself as a voice of conscience in their industry, someone had been working to erase her from the world they'd conquered together? The golden invitation caught the afternoon light, its surface reflecting the city below like a mirror. Marcus Washington, worth $3 billion, master of an empire that spanned the globe, found himself facing a problem that money couldn't solve and power couldn't fix. Someone had declared war on his wife. And he was only just beginning to understand the battlefield. Amara Washington wasn't supposed to make it out of Detroit's East Side. Born to a mother working 3 jobs, she clawed her way to Harvard Law, then Stanford Business School. She married a man who built an empire from nothing. Together, they donated $50 million to charity. Together, they served on 12 nonprofit boards. But when Silicon Valley's elite gathered to decide who mattered, Amara Williams Washington was erased with the stroke of a pen. Marcus makes the first call. Then the second. Then the third. Each conversation reveals the same truth: his wife's name was removed from the guest list 3 weeks ago. No explanation. No apology. Just gone. But Marcus Washington didn't build a $3 billion empire by accepting easy answers. He builds a spreadsheet. He records the calls. And with each conversation, the pattern becomes clearer. This isn't a mistake. This is a message. The Peninsula Foundation isn't just a charity. It's a fortress where old money meets new power. Founded in 1962, it's where tech titans and venture capitalists gather to decide who belongs in Silicon Valley. Victoria Ashford, heir to a railroad fortune, has run the foundation for 15 years. The photos on her office walls tell the story: decades of galas, hundreds of faces, and almost none of them look like Amara Washington. In Silicon Valley, the invitation list isn't about charity. It's about control. Victoria Ashford's voice drips with false sweetness through the phone. "Oh Marcus, darling, I'm sure you understand. The table arrangements are just so complicated this year. Perhaps next year would be better for both of you." The pause before "both of you" lasts exactly 2 seconds. Long enough for Marcus Washington to understand that 20 years of building relationships, of writing checks, of playing by their rules, means nothing. Long enough for him to decide that the rules are about to change. Marcus turns his company's cybersecurity division into a private investigation unit. David Kim, former NSA analyst, begins mapping the foundation's digital footprint. What they find in the deleted emails and recovered documents changes everything. Internal messages discussing managing the optics of the guest list. Conversations about cultural fit and maintaining standards. The language is careful, coded, but the meaning is crystal clear. The exclusion wasn't an oversight. It was a strategy. The documents tell a story spanning 30 years. Tax filings showing minimal donations to black-led organizations. Board minutes using phrases like alignment with our values. Grant applications from diverse groups mysteriously losing funding at the final stage. Private investigator Sarah Torres spreads the papers across her conference table. Each document is a thread in a web of systematic exclusion that reaches far beyond one charity gala. The Peninsula Foundation has been gatekeeping opportunity for decades. Marcus isn't alone in his frustration. In a private club overlooking San Francisco Bay, 3 of Silicon Valley's most successful entrepreneurs share their stories. Each worth hundreds of millions. Each excluded from the inner circle. Jasmine Rodriguez, who built her fintech empire from scratch. Kenneth Brown, whose venture capital firm manages $2 billion in assets. All successful. All shut out. They're not seeking inclusion anymore. They're planning a revolution. Marcus begins withdrawing his empire's support from foundation-connected businesses. A $50 million real estate deal collapses overnight. A tech partnership dissolves. A venture capital firm loses its biggest client. The phone calls start immediately. Panicked voices asking what's wrong, what they can do to fix it. But Marcus Washington isn't interested in fixing anything. He's interested in watching their world burn. The Peninsula Foundation's emergency board meeting lasts 4 hours. The leaked recordings reveal their true nature: 23 minutes discussing damage control, 47 minutes planning their counterattack. Victoria Ashford's voice cuts through the conference room: "We built this system. We're not going to let some upstart destroy it because his wife can't take a hint. The gloves are off. The war has begun." Within hours, Marcus's company faces a coordinated assault. Cyber attacks on their servers. Government contracts mysteriously delayed. Anonymous sources leaking damaging stories to tech blogs. But they underestimated David Kim's team. Every digital fingerprint tells a story. Every attack has a source. And the trail leads straight back to the Foundation's hired mercenaries. The quiet war just went digital. The stories appear simultaneously in 3 major publications. Marcus portrayed as a difficult entrepreneur. Amara described as someone who struggles to fit in with Silicon Valley society. The language is careful, coded. The message is clear. But Marcus and Amara have been reading between these lines their entire lives. They know exactly what difficult and doesn't fit really mean. Angela Martinez has worked at the Peninsula Foundation for 6 years. She's watched the grant rejections, the guest list exclusions, the careful maintenance of barriers. She's kept quiet to keep her job. But the leaked documents she provides to Marcus's team reveal the true scope of the operation. Internal communications showing deliberate strategies to exclude black philanthropists from funding and influence. Sometimes conscience costs everything. Sometimes it's worth it. The Peninsula Foundation's discrimination didn't start with Marcus and Amara. Archival footage from the 1960s shows the same patterns: charity galas with faces that never change, board meetings where diversity is discussed as a problem to be managed. The Foundation has been perfecting the art of exclusion for 60 years. Each generation more sophisticated than the last. But they never expected their victims to fight back with equal sophistication. The discovery changes everything. Hidden in the Foundation's financial records, Marcus's team finds evidence of charitable funds flowing to organizations with direct ties to white supremacist groups. This isn't about social exclusion anymore. This is about a tax-exempt charity funding hate. Marcus stares at the documents spread across his desk. The decision he makes in the next 60 seconds will determine whether this stays a private battle or becomes a public reckoning. Civil rights attorney Michael Chen has built his career fighting sophisticated discrimination. He knows that proving systematic exclusion requires more than hurt feelings, it requires evidence, patterns, and consequences. The strategy is elegant: multiple lawsuits filed simultaneously across different jurisdictions. Each case targeting a different aspect of the Foundation's operations. They're not just seeking damages. They're seeking to dismantle the entire system. When Marcus finally goes public with his accusations, the response is immediate and overwhelming. The hashtag gatekeepers expose trends worldwide as thousands share their own stories of exclusion. Tech executives, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists reveal decades of similar treatment. The individual stories create a collective narrative about systematic gatekeeping in American institutions. Social media has given the excluded a voice. And they're using it. Silicon Valley's biggest companies face an impossible choice: support Marcus and risk alienating longtime partners, or stay silent and face public backlash. Some choose quickly. Others calculate carefully. The decisions reveal the true power structures in American business. In boardrooms across the valley, executives discover that neutrality is no longer an option. The battle is consuming everything. Marcus barely sleeps. Amara manages death threats and hate mail. Their 17-year-old daughter faces harassment at school. The house that was once their sanctuary now requires armed security. The marriage that survived building an empire from nothing faces its greatest test. Fighting for justice always costs more than anyone expects. The Peninsula Foundation's perfect facade begins to crumble. 3 board members resign. Major donors withdraw support. Staff members quit rather than defend the indefensible. Victoria Ashford calls emergency meetings, but the room gets smaller each time. The institution she spent 15 years building is collapsing around her. Power structures seem permanent until they aren't. The private server contains everything. Years of communications between Foundation board members and extremist organizations. Email chains discussing maintaining racial purity in charitable giving. Financial records showing systematic funding of hate groups. David Kim stares at his computer screen, knowing that what he's discovered will destroy lives and careers. But some secrets are too dangerous to keep. The evidence is undeniable. The Foundation isn't just excluding people, it's funding hate. The FBI raid begins at dawn. Federal agents seize computers, financial records, and communications. The IRS freezes the Foundation's assets. The Justice Department announces a civil rights investigation. Victoria Ashford watches from her office window as federal agents carry away 30 years of carefully maintained records. Some fights are too big for private resolution. 3 major publications issue retractions. The stories about Marcus being difficult and Amara not fitting in were based on information provided by the Foundation's PR firm without proper verification. Editors are fired. Relationships are severed. The careful media manipulation that helped maintain the Foundation's power is exposed. When the gatekeepers lose control of the narrative, the truth becomes unstoppable. The corporate sponsorships disappear overnight. Tech companies, banks, and investment firms distance themselves from the Foundation. The board positions that once conferred prestige become toxic. The economic impact is immediate and devastating. The Foundation that once controlled hundreds of millions in charitable giving faces financial collapse. In Silicon Valley, reputation is everything. And the Foundation's reputation is destroyed. The most damaging stories come from inside the Foundation itself. Board members who grew up facing discrimination now enforcing it. Executives who broke barriers for themselves while maintaining them for others. The psychology of exclusion is complex. Sometimes victims become perpetrators when they gain power. The Foundation's leadership included people who should have known better. That makes their actions even worse. Congressional hearings are announced. Presidential candidates weigh in. The Foundation scandal becomes part of the national conversation about race, wealth, and power in America. Marcus and Amara decide to testify before Congress. Their appearance will be watched by millions. Private battles sometimes become public reckonings. The story goes global. International media examines American power structures. Foreign governments question their relationships with implicated individuals. Marcus and Amara find themselves inadvertent symbols of a global movement for equality and inclusion. American domestic issues have international implications. Victoria Ashford's final press conference is a masterclass in damage control. She announces comprehensive reforms, diversity initiatives, and new oversight mechanisms. But the public has heard these promises before. The foundation's credibility is beyond repair. Some institutions can be reformed. Others must be replaced. Federal prosecutors announce criminal charges against 7 foundation board members. Tax fraud, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The perp walk is broadcast live, respected community leaders in handcuffs, facing decades in prison. Privilege can protect you from many things. Federal prosecutors aren't one of them. The civil lawsuits result in massive settlements. The foundation agrees to pay $200 million to organizations it previously excluded from funding. Marcus and Amara announced they're donating their entire settlement to establish a new foundation with transparent processes and diverse leadership. Sometimes justice is measured in dollars. Sometimes it's measured in change. Silicon Valley's charitable organizations implement new diversity requirements and transparency measures. The changes are swift and comprehensive. The power structure that excluded people like Marcus and Amara is being dismantled and rebuilt. Systematic change requires systematic pressure. Victory comes with a price. Relationships destroyed. Careers ended. Families divided. The Washington family's triumph is shadowed by the human cost of their battle. Marcus and Amara question whether the ends justified the means. Their daughter struggles with the notoriety. Fighting for justice doesn't guarantee happiness. Major news organizations implement new policies about source verification and bias training. The foundation scandal exposed how media manipulation shapes public perception. Journalists who covered the story poorly face professional consequences. Others used the experience to improve their practice. The media's role in maintaining power structures is finally being examined. The foundation scandal affects elections across California. Politicians are forced to defend their relationships with implicated individuals. Some survive the scrutiny. Others don't. The voters have spoken. Political consequences follow moral failures. International charitable organizations implement new transparency measures to prevent similar scandals. The American Foundation story becomes a cautionary tale worldwide. Marcus and Amara emerge as global advocates for equality and inclusion. Change spreads across borders. Young people inspired by the Washington family's story begin organizing their own efforts to address exclusion in their communities. High school students audit their school's honor societies. College students examine their university's donor recognition programs. The next generation refuses to accept the barriers their parents faced. The business world adapts to new expectations about authentic diversity efforts. Companies that embraced change early gain competitive advantages. Marcus's influence extends beyond his own industry. The new standards he helped establish become best practices across sectors. Business evolution follows social evolution. 1 year later, Marcus and Amara work to heal their relationship and family after the trauma of the public battle. They've learned that victory without family is hollow. That public triumph means nothing if private relationships are destroyed. The most important battles are fought at home. 2 years after the scandal, the changes in Silicon Valley's charitable landscape are documented and measured. Diversity in leadership has increased by 40%. Funding to minority-led organizations has doubled. The Peninsula Foundation still exists, but under new leadership with transparent processes. Institutional change takes time, but it can happen. The Washington family attends a charity gala, this time, one they're organizing themselves. The guest list looks like America, diverse, inclusive, powerful. But questions remain. How many other institutions maintain similar exclusionary practices? What would American society look like if all barriers were removed? Marcus and Amara won their battle. But the war for true equality continues. Some fights end with clear victories. Others end with more questions than answers. The invitation that started it all sits framed in their home office, a reminder that change begins when someone refuses to accept the unacceptable. Who decides who belongs in America? And who gave them that power? November 20th, 2023. Various locations. The autumn air carried a different weight now, 6 months after the scandal that had shaken the foundations of American high society. In boardrooms across Manhattan, new faces sat at mahogany tables where once only familiar bloodlines had gathered. Yet for all the reshuffling of power, the fundamental question remained: had anything truly changed, or had the machinery of exclusion simply learned to wear more palatable masks? Marcus Washington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown office, watching the city pulse with its relentless energy below. The view had once filled him with the satisfaction of arrival, the sweet vindication of a man who had clawed his way to the top despite every obstacle placed in his path. Now, as he prepared to leave for the evening's charity gala, one he and Amara were organizing themselves, he found himself wrestling with more complex emotions. The scandal had certainly brought consequences. The exclusive club that had rejected him so callously now boasted a diversity committee and a revised membership policy. Several corporate boards had added new faces, and the social circuit buzzed with talk of inclusion and equity. Yet Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing an elaborate performance, a theatrical adaptation rather than genuine transformation. Across town, Amara packed the last of the auction items into their velvet-lined cases. The evening's fundraiser would benefit scholarship programs for underprivileged youth, a cause that had become her passion project since the events of the spring. She moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind wandered to the conversations she'd had with other women who had found themselves suddenly welcomed into circles that had once been closed to them. "We're the acceptable faces now," one had confided to her over lunch at a restaurant that had mysteriously found space for them after years of claiming to be fully booked. "We make them feel better about themselves while the real barriers remain invisible." The observation had haunted Amara for weeks. She had achieved everything she had once dreamed of: acceptance, recognition, a seat at tables where decisions were made. Yet she found herself questioning whether her presence was meaningful change or merely window dressing on structures that remained fundamentally unchanged. In Washington, D.C., Senator Patricia Hawthorne reviewed the latest draft of the equality legislation that had emerged from the scandal's aftermath. The bill had been watered down in committee, its teeth dulled by compromise and political expediency. Still, she told herself, it was progress. Incremental change was better than no change at all. But as she signed off on amendments that she knew would get the bill's most meaningful provisions, she wondered if she was being practical or complicit. The questions multiplied like fractal patterns, each answer revealing new complexities. What did true equality look like in a country built on hierarchies both visible and hidden? Was it enough to diversify the faces and positions of power, or did the systems themselves need to be dismantled and rebuilt? How do you measure the progress of hearts and minds when the machinery of exclusion has learned to operate in whispers rather than shouts? The evening's charity gala would bring together a carefully curated mix of old money and new influence, traditional power brokers and rising voices from previously marginalized communities. The guest list read like a deliberate answer to the homogeneous gatherings that had once defined high society. Representatives from tech companies led by immigrant entrepreneurs mingled with descendants of civil rights leaders. Young activists who had built movements on social media platforms stood in conversation with established philanthropists whose families had shaped American culture for generations. Yet even in this intentional diversity, patterns emerged. The conversation still flowed along predictable channels, the real decisions still happened in smaller, more exclusive circles. The mechanisms of power had evolved, become more sophisticated, but had they fundamentally changed? Marcus and Amara's journey had begun with a simple desire for recognition, for the right to exist in spaces that had been closed to them. They had achieved that goal, but the victory felt incomplete. They had opened doors, but those doors led to rooms with other doors, and behind those doors lay systems of exclusion that were more subtle but perhaps more enduring. The couple found themselves occupying a strange position, simultaneously inside and outside, welcomed yet watched, successful yet skeptical. They had become symbols of progress while remaining acutely aware of how much progress remained to be made. Their presence in exclusive circles was both a triumph and a reminder of how exceptional their presence was considered to be. As the evening approached and the first guests arrived at the Metropolitan Museum's Grand Hall, the questions hung in the air like incense. The assembled crowd represented something unprecedented in American high society, a gathering that truly reflected the country's diversity. Children of immigrants stood beside descendants of enslaved people, who mingled with the heirs of industrial fortunes and the architects of technological revolutions. Yet beneath the surface of celebration and charity, the fundamental tensions remained unresolved. The systems of exclusion had not disappeared, they had simply become more sophisticated. The barriers were now psychological rather than explicitly legal, cultural rather than institutional, invisible rather than obvious. The work of true equality, Marcus and Amara realized, was not a destination but a continuous journey. Each victory revealed new challenges, each open door exposed new rooms that remained locked. The scandal had been a beginning, not an ending, a moment of clarity that illuminated the path ahead rather than marking its conclusion. As the orchestra began to play and the evening's program commenced, the couple stood together at the edge of the crowd they had helped to assemble. The scene before them was beautiful and complex, hopeful and frustrating, a perfect metaphor for the country they loved and the work that remained to be done. The questions that had driven their journey, questions of belonging, of equality, of what it meant to be American, remained as relevant as ever. The scandal had provided some answers, but it had also revealed the depths of the challenges that lay ahead. In the end, perhaps the most important realization was that the questions themselves were not problems to be solved but ongoing responsibilities to be embraced. The evening stretched ahead, full of promise and uncertainty, much like the country itself, forever struggling to live up to its highest ideals while grappling with the stubborn realities of human nature and institutional inertia. The work continued, one conversation at a time, one relationship at a time, one generation at a time. And in the Grand Hall of the Metropolitan Museum, surrounded by art that celebrated human achievement across cultures and centuries, Marcus and Amara Washington stood as living proof that change was possible, even if it was neither simple nor complete.